My name is Anya Sharma. For 15 years, I was the head of franchise compliance for one of the largest coffee brands in the world. It's a title that sounds like it was invented by a committee to put people to sleep. It doesn't even begin to describe what I did. I was not a manager. I was an architect. The company's success was built on a single, simple promise. The coffee you bought in a Tokyo train station would be identical to the coffee you bought in a suburban Ohio strip mall. That promise was not magic. It was a system, my system. I called it the Apex framework. It wasn't a binder of rules. It was a 200-megabyte ecosystem of logistics, training protocols, and quality control metrics that I had coded, designed, and implemented from the ground up. Tamping pressure, grind consistency, water temperature to within half a degree. These were not suggestions. They were physics. The physics of perfection, repeated 10 million times a day across the globe. The Apex framework managed everything from the humidity levels of the bean silos in Colombia to the approved decibel level of the music played in a cafe in Seoul. It was my life's work, a finely tuned engine of quality in a world that settles for good enough. He had no idea what he was really trying to steal. It wasn't a company. It was my legacy. My life outside the office was governed by similar principles. I lived alone, by choice. My home was a quiet sanctuary of order. In a small temperature-controlled greenhouse, I cultivated black orchids. They are notoriously difficult plants. They demand patience, precision, and an intimate understanding of their complex needs. They cannot be rushed. They cannot be bullied into blooming. They reward discipline and care. On my nightstand, a well-worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, Stoicism and Botany. That was my balance. Control what you can control. Let the rest be noise. For a long time, it was enough. Then came Declan Pierce. Declan was the founder's son, which in the corporate world is a credential in itself. He was 38 years old, but had the unearned confidence of a teenager who's just been given the keys to his dad's sports car. He wore his father's company like he wore his suits, expensively and poorly. He was a walking collection of bad ideas and a thesaurus of business buzzwords he didn't understand. I first met him in the main boardroom. It was a space I knew well, a place of quiet, data-driven decisions. He strode in 10 minutes late, smelling of aggressive cologne and radiating the smug energy of a man who had never been told no in his life. He was the new president of domestic operations. "Team," he began, and I hated him immediately for using that word. We were not his team. We were assets he had inherited. It's time to synergize our lifestyle vertical and start growth hacking our consumer-facing model. I made a note on my tablet. It said, "Sell more stuff to people." He continued, his voice slick with manufactured enthusiasm. "We need to pivot from our legacy mindset and embrace a more agile, disruptive paradigm." My translation: the old way made money, but it was boring, and I want to do something new and shiny. What he didn't understand was that the legacy mindset was the Apex framework. It was the bedrock of our $8 billion valuation. It was the quiet, relentless hum of competence that powered the entire machine. He saw it as an obstacle. The small humiliations started almost immediately. They were tests, little assertions of dominance. In a leadership meeting, while I was presenting quarterly compliance data, he waved a dismissive hand. Yes, the numbers are fine," he said, turning to the sycophants from the marketing department. "But what Anya's team really is the sales prevention department, right?" A few people chuckled nervously. The marketing VP brayed like a donkey. I felt a hot flush of anger, but I kept my expression neutral. I simply made a note. A small, precise entry in a ledger I kept only in my mind. A week later, an email. He had single-handedly approved a new pastry supplier for the entire West Coast. They were cheaper. Significantly cheaper. I ran the supplier's specs against the framework. They failed on 17 different metrics, from butterfat content to supply chain hygiene standards. I sent him a polite but firm email, attaching the relevant data, explaining that this would compromise brand integrity. His reply, sent to me and CC'ing his entire leadership team, contained a single sentence. "Relax. It's a croissant, not a spaceship component. Another entry in the mental ledger. He wasn't just incompetent. He was proud of it. He believed his title made him an expert in all things, from finance to flour. The final cut came during the launch of his Growth Acceleration Initiative. The name itself was a masterpiece of corporate nonsense. It meant selling franchises to anyone with a check that would clear, regardless of their qualifications. I stood up in the boardroom and calmly explained the risks. I detailed the rigorous financial and operational stress tests built into the Apex framework, tests designed to ensure new owners wouldn't fail. A rigorous vetting process protects both the brand and the franchisee, I concluded. It ensures sustainable growth. Declan didn't respond to my point. Instead, he walked over to me, and in front of my team and the entire executive board, he patted me on the shoulder. It was a gesture of such profound condescension it took my breath away. "Let the big boys worry about the big picture, Anya," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. The ledger was almost full. The inciting incident, the moment the cold calculus of revenge began, involved a man named Braden. Braden was one of Declan's college friends, a trust fund playboy with a vacant smile and the business acumen of a golden retriever. Declan awarded him a 5-store franchise deal in the lucrative Denver market. It was a disaster. It was a disaster I had predicted down to the decimal point. Braden immediately began cutting corners to pad his profits. He used cheaper, non-approved milk. He slashed staffing and training hours. He ignored cleanliness protocols. Customer complaints, once a statistical anomaly in the Denver market, skyrocketed. Photos of dirty stores and poorly made drinks started appearing online. I did my job. I compiled a report. It was 40 pages long, bound in a sleek black cover. It was a masterwork of data and evidence. It had color-coded violation tabs. It contained photographic proof of health code violations. It included a profit and loss analysis that showed, in stark, undeniable terms, the immediate brand damage Braden was causing. It was irrefutable. It was a case for immediate termination of his franchise agreement, as stipulated in the very contract he had signed. I walked into Declan's glass-walled office without an appointment. He was leaning back in his chair, his absurdly expensive shoes propped up on his polished mahogany desk. He was scrolling through Instagram on his phone. He didn't acknowledge me. He didn't invite me to sit. I placed the report on his desk. The sound made a solid, satisfying thud. "Declan," I said, my voice level, "the Denver stores are in critical breach of contract. We are legally and ethically obligated to act." He glanced at the report, then back at his phone. He sighed, a theatrical exhalation of boredom. He picked up my report, my 40 pages of meticulous work, of undeniable fact. He thumbed through it, his expression one of profound disinterest. Then he swiveled in his chair. Next to his desk was a sleek, industrial-grade paper shredder. It was a piece of office theater, a prop for a man who produced nothing of value to destroy. He took my report, my work, and fed it into the machine. The whir of the blades was the only sound in the room. It was a high-pitched scream, chewing through data, through facts, through reason. I watched as my work was turned into meaningless confetti. He swiveled back to face me. A smirk played on his lips. "Braden is a growth driver, Anya," he sneered. The words were quiet, but they echoed in the silent office. "You're just a hall monitor." He stood up then, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. "And this obsession with the past is disrupting our new growth strategy. We're terminating your position, effective immediately." I didn't flinch. I just looked at him. I saw the petty triumph in his eyes. He had wanted this. He had wanted to humiliate me. The public indignity was the point. There were 2 security guards already waiting outside his door. They had been called before I even walked in. As they escorted me to my office to collect my things, every head in the open-plan workspace turned to watch. The walk of shame. But I felt no shame. I felt a profound, almost serene clarity. The ledger was full. The debt was due. What Declan didn't understand was that I wasn't just the hall monitor. I was the architect of the entire school, and I had built it with a failsafe. I packed the contents of my desk into a single small box, my pens, a framed photo of my parents, my copy of Meditations, I did not cry. I did not rage. My movements were precise, methodical. As I walked out of the building for the last time, past the faces of my former colleagues, a strange sense of calm washed over me. This was not an ending. It was a trigger. My response would not be emotional, it would be strategic. I went home. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't call a friend to vent. I went to my greenhouse. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and living things. I gently touched the petal of a black orchid. It was a delicate, intricate thing of profound beauty, sustained by a complex, invisible system. A system I understood, a system I controlled. Then I went to my office, sat down at my laptop, and began my real work. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call a headhunter. I pulled up a file from a securely encrypted personal drive. It was the master template for the standard franchise agreement, the one I had spent 18 months redesigning 5 years ago. I had built this system with one hidden feature, a feature I had put in place for exactly this kind of scenario, a day when an arrogant fool like Declan Pierce would value ego over excellence. It was buried deep in the legalese. Section 11, subsection B, the brand integrity clause. It was a beautiful piece of contractual engineering, elegant, simple, devastating. It stated that if the corporate office was formally notified of significant, repeated brand standard violations by a franchisee and failed to take corrective action within 90 days, any other franchisee operating in the same broadcast media market had the legal right to terminate their own agreement. Penalty-free. They could walk away, debrand their stores, and continue operating as independent businesses. It was a mutual self-destruct button designed to protect the body of the company from a diseased head. It had never been used. Declan, I was certain, had never even read it. I booked a flight to Denver. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the quiet back room of a coffee shop that smelled of roasted beans and floor polish, a shop that was, in every conceivable way, perfect. It was run by a man named Marcus Thorne, a retired Marine colonel who had bought his first franchise 10 years ago and now owned 6. He was a man who understood rules and discipline. With him were 2 other people. Elena Ramirez, a sharp, savvy businesswoman who had built an empire of 7 stores with her daughter, and David Chen, an immigrant who had started with a single, struggling location and turned it into a 3-store powerhouse through sheer hard work and a fanatical devotion to quality. They were the 3 most successful, most respected owner-operators in the Denver market. Over the years I had worked with all of them. They knew me. They knew my standards. They trusted me. I didn't give them a speech about revenge. I didn't complain about Declan. I treated it like any other business meeting. I laid out the facts. First, I placed a fresh copy of my report on Braden's stores on the table, the one Declan had shredded. They passed it around, their expressions growing grimmer with each page. They were professionals. They saw the sloppy procedures, the cheap ingredients, the dirt, not just as a mess, but as a direct insult to the work they did every single day. "This is an infection," Marcus said, his voice a low growl. "It's poisoning the brand we all paid for." "Exactly," I replied. Then I slid 3 more documents across the table, copies of their own franchise agreements. Each one was tabbed to Section 11, subsection B. "You have a contractual remedy," I said calmly. I explained the brand integrity clause. I watched their faces as the implications dawned on them. It wasn't anger I saw. It was the slow, dawning realization of power, the power I had written for them years ago. I was not asking them for a favor. I was presenting them with a business case, a legal off-ramp from a partnership that was no longer serving their interests. There was a long silence. Elena Ramirez, who had said nothing up to that point, looked directly at me. "You knew," she said. It wasn't a question. "You built this in, waiting for a day like this." A small, quiet smile touched my lips. It was the first time I had smiled in weeks. It was a feeling of profound, intimate satisfaction. It was the quiet pleasure of a perfectly designed system, a lock and key clicking into place. The trap was set. They understood. The formal notice of breach was delivered to the corporate headquarters by a legal courier the following Monday. It was a dry, professional document, citing dozens of specific, ongoing violations in Braden's stores and formally invoking the 90-day cure period as outlined in Section 11, subsection B of their agreements. I learned later, from a source still inside the company, what happened when Declan saw it. He didn't call an emergency meeting. He didn't consult the board. He laughed. He walked into the legal department, tossed the letter on the general counsel's desk, and said, "It's just Anya stirring up trouble." Send them a form letter. Make it sound scary. His ego made it impossible for him to see the threat. He saw franchisees as tenants, not partners. He saw me as a disgruntled former employee, not a strategist. His arrogance was the final, critical component of my plan. It was the fuel the fire needed. What he didn't understand was that he had just started a countdown clock to his own destruction. On a large monitor in my home office, I set up a simple 90-day countdown. The days passed. The world kept turning. Declan was photographed at a charity golf tournament, his smile wide and empty. Braden's stores continued their downward spiral. Online reviews became a cavalcade of horrors. Cold coffee, dirty bathrooms. The staff seemed miserable. Each one was a small, satisfying tick of the clock. I spent my time in my greenhouse. I repotted my orchids. I read my book. I waited. Patience is a weapon. I was watching a slow-motion chemical reaction I had initiated. The outcome was not in doubt. It was simply a matter of time. 52 days remaining. A junior lawyer in the corporate office sent a follow-up letter to the Denver franchisees. It was full of empty threats and legal jargon. It was ignored. 31 days remaining. Braden's flagship store in downtown Denver failed its health inspection. Declan's solution was to send in a commercial cleaning crew for one night and pressure the inspector to do a reevaluation. He was treating the symptom, completely oblivious to the disease. 10 days remaining. I received a quiet email from Marcus Thorne. It just said, "We're ready." 1 day remaining. I went to bed early. I slept soundly. It began at 5 a.m. Mountain Time. On the 91st day, the first posts appeared on social media, a photo of a familiar coffee shop, but the green corporate logo was gone. In its place was a sleek new sign in deep blue and bronze. It read, "Covenant Coffee." Then another photo, and another. All across Denver, 16 of the company's most profitable stores were simultaneously debranding. The franchisees had hired crews to work through the night. It was a coordinated, silent, overnight coup. By the time the New York stock market opened, the story had been picked up by a financial news blog. Franchisee revolt wipes out coffee giant in major market. The headline was brutal. I was sitting at my desk, a cup of my own perfectly brewed coffee in hand. On my main monitor, I had the live feed of a financial news network. On a second monitor, I had the company's real-time stock ticker. I watched his world collapse in real time. The stock opened down 12%, then 15%. As institutional investors began to understand the legal implications, that this wasn't just a dispute, but a systemic, contractual failure, the selling accelerated. 20%, 25%. The talking heads on television were frantic, speculating wildly. "A catastrophic failure of management," one analyst said. I allowed myself another small smile. Declan, I imagined, was waking up to a firestorm. His phone would be a vibrating brick of panic. Calls from the board, from investors, from his father. His carefully constructed world of buzzwords and bluster was being torn apart by the cold, hard logic of a contract he had never bothered to read. He had planted a seed of chaos, and it had grown into a forest that was now consuming him. His drive to the office must have been terrifying. The man who saw himself as a titan of industry was now just a guy in an expensive suit facing absolute ruin. He had prepared a strategy, of course. It would be my fault. I was the disgruntled employee who had poisoned the well. He would walk into that boardroom and project confidence, blame me, and promise to fix it. But the climax wasn't a confrontation with me. I wasn't even in the state. The reckoning was a confrontation with a number. I had a source on the board. A quiet, older gentleman who had despised Declan from day one. He described the scene to me later. Declan walked into the boardroom, his face pale but his jaw set, ready to deliver his speech. He stopped dead. The room was silent. The entire board of directors was there, their faces like stone. No one spoke. The chairman, a man named Arthur Sterling, simply pointed a finger. He was pointing at the 80-inch screen on the wall. It was displaying a single image. The live stock ticker. It was a waterfall of red, down 28%, $2 billion of market capitalization, erased. The number was his only accuser. It was his judge and jury. The look on his face when he realized it was over. That was my true reward. There were no arguments he could make, no buzzwords that could save him. He was confronted with the undeniable, catastrophic consequence of his own fatal error. His incompetence distilled into a single devastating number. He was utterly and completely exposed. The board fired him that afternoon. The press release cited catastrophic mismanagement and a dereliction of duty. His name was toxic. His career was over. Braden's failed franchises were liquidated within a month. Covenant Coffee, meanwhile, was a sensation. The story of the franchisee revolt, of quality over corporate greed, was marketing gold. Marcus, Elena, and David were local heroes. They were the Davids who had slain Goliath. Their first official act as a new company was to hold a press conference. They announced that Covenant Coffee was expanding, and they were looking for a new chief executive officer, someone with an unparalleled understanding of operational excellence and brand integrity. The call came an hour later. It wasn't a job interview, it was a coronation. I was offered the position of CEO, with a significant equity stake in the company we had built together from the ashes of Declan's failure. I didn't just get my job back, I got a better one. I owned it. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. Declan Pierce, the self-proclaimed growth driver, had engineered the single largest market contraction in his company's history. And me, the hall monitor he had so casually discarded, was now the CEO of his most dangerous and celebrated competitor. Months later, I was sitting in my new office. It was larger than Declan's old one with a better view. A journalist from a major business magazine was interviewing me for a feature profile on Covenant Coffee's explosive success. She asked all the usual questions about our growth, our philosophy, our future. Finally, she leaned forward, her pen poised. "What's your secret, Ms. Sharma? How did you build something so successful, so quickly?" I looked past her, at the camera that was recording our interview. I thought about Declan. I thought about the shredder, the sneer, the casual cruelty. I thought about the elegant, beautiful logic of the Apex framework of Section 11, subsection B. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. "We just follow the rules," I said. "We believe that integrity is the only growth strategy that lasts." I never said his name. I didn't have to.